I'm fishing at Packington Somers on Molan's Lake, and I'm going to show you a few tips relating to feeder fishing on commercials. It's a nice small tench. Let's put it back and talk about the methods we're using. I'm often asked how to approach a commercial such as this with the feeder. And I'm now going to take you through 3 different styles of feeder fishing that are proving very, very successful on commercials just like this. The first thing I'm going to look at is the actual rods and reels that we use when we're feeder fishing. I've selected 2 rods from the new Shakespeare Sigma range. I've got the 11-foot feeder and the 10-foot feeder. Now, this commercial is pretty typical in that it's not very, very big in terms of its size, in terms of the width that you're casting. It's probably about 30 meters wide here, so I don't need a long rod to cast big distances. So 10 and 11 foot is just about perfect in terms of the length of the rod for a fishery like this. Another thing to think about is the fact that most modern commercial feeder rods are 2-piece. The advantage of that is that you can leave your rod set up, so you can take the rod apart, leave the rig on, and keep it all set up to save time when you're fishing. The 10-foot feeder is supplied with 2 different tips. Now they're both 2 ounce in test curve. The test curve is the amount of weight taken to bend the tip by 90 degrees. And you also need to think about the material used in the tip construction. This rod's supplied with 2 tips, as I say. One's made from glass and one made from carbon. Well, the 2 different materials in the tip will provide 2 different actions. And a glass tip like this one will provide a much more progressive action that's softer, which is better for when you're looking for more sensitive bites. The carbon tip typically has a faster action, so it bends more at the tip and is better when you're looking for positive pull round bites and to enhance the bolt rig effect. So it's nice to think about the 2 types of tip construction that you're using. On the 11-foot feeder, this rod's actually supplied with 3 tips. You've got an 1.5 ounce glass tip, a 2 ounce carbon tip and a 3 ounce carbon tip. Again, it just gives you the variety in tip to enable you to utilize the correct tip in the conditions that you faced. So if you need to be fishing finer and looking for shy bites, then you need to be using a softer tip. When you're casting with a method feeder and you don't really need that sensitivity in the tip, a stiffer tip like this 3 ounce carbon tip will be the choice, the perfect choice. Well, to me, the main consideration when picking my feeder rod, length, is how far I'm casting. So if I've got to cast a good distance, like 50-60 meters, I'm going to need to go to a longer rod to help me to cast that distance easily and effectively. Like I said, this commercial is about 30 meters wide, so you could fish with a rod between 9 and 11 foot, no problem at all. The handle length is another key consideration to think about, and you'll notice that on the shorter feeder rods, the actual handle length is shorter to balance perfectly with the length of the rod. Because you're not having to cast a long way and leverage a lot of power in the cast, you don't need a long handle. It's nice to have a shorter handle because it's just more convenient, more comfortable to use. It's easier to pass around your body, particularly if you're catching lots of fish quickly. So, in answer to the question, a shorter handle's better at shorter distances, a longer handle's better at long distances. Well, the reels I've selected today are not massive in terms of the size. This is a Sigma 035 size front drag, which complements the length of the rod perfectly. It's all about balancing the right size of reel to the length of the rod. Well, these Sigma reels are supplied with two handles. You've got a double handle, as you can see here, but you've also got a single handle. Now, it's pretty much down to personal preference which handle you use. I like a double handle, especially when I'm feeder fishing or ledgering, because it means that I can set the tip, everything perfectly, but have the instant anti-reverse off. So I can back wind if I hook a fish. And the double handle balances it perfectly. A single handle is prone to falling backwards or forwards. A disadvantage of using a double handle is you don't get as much leverage as what you do with a single handle. So if you're looking for maximum power, maybe if you're casting longer distances and you've got to reel in a long way, a longer single handle would be more beneficial. This is what we call a free spool reel. And free spool reels are very, very popular when you're carp fishing on commercials such as this. They've become very popular for people feeder fishing. A couple of reasons. One, typically they're a very strong and powerful reel. So this is a new Sigma 40 size free spool reel. The second advantage is you can actually have the reel set in the free spool mode so that the reel will give line when you set it at the start. So as the cart runs or as the fish runs, the reel will give line. Then when you pick the rod up to engage, you turn the handle and then you're back on the standard drag. So it's a free spool facility that's very, very useful when you're fishing for bigger fish. Maybe you're waiting longer for bites, or maybe even if you're fishing with two rods, just to enable you the time to pick the rod up and allow the carp or the big fish to run. Again, it's a little bit like the handles, it's down to personal preference. I like to use a front drag reel for most of my fishing because I think it makes the reels more compact, and also you can achieve a more reliable and smooth drag system. The disadvantage of using a front drag reel is it's difficult to adjust it during the fight, and a rear drag reel, having the rear drag situated at the back, means that it's easy to adjust the drag during the fight. Another advantage of the rear drag reels is that you can have a quick release spool mechanism on the reel. Okay, well, obviously main lines are a really important consideration. I've spooled these two reels up today with 5-pound line. Now, as I'm not catching specimen size carp, I'm catching good carp up to 8 pound hopefully. I don't need to go too heavy on the main line. And the line I've actually selected is this Berkeley Trilene Sensation feeder. And that's got a diameter of 0.20 millimeter. So it's got quite a fine diameter for its quite high breaking strain. But the good thing about this line is that it's a robust and reliable reel line, something that you need when you're fishing on a venue such as this, where you're potentially casting a lot during the session, catching some good fish and putting a lot of strain on the line. So for me, I'll never use a high-tech or pre-stretched line on the reel when I'm feeder fishing on a commercial. If I was expecting to catch bigger carp and maybe I was fishing with a method feeder predominantly, I'd use a higher breaking strain line. I wouldn't personally go above 8 pound breaking strain or diameter 0.28 when I'm fishing on a commercial such as this. The minimum breaking strain I'd go would be, I wouldn't probably go below 3 pound. There's just simply no need to, because the fact that you're going to be able to perhaps catch the odd big fish even in hard conditions, you need to have that strength in main line. You're not going to benefit from going too fine. In fact, you probably end up losing the fish. Well, I've set up 3 different types of feeder rig today, which pretty much encapsulates all the styles of feeder fishing that I do on a commercial. I've got your standard cage feeder. Now this is the rig that I would use to start the day, particularly if I didn't know too much about the venue. This is a rig that's designed to catch all sorts of fish, from smaller fish like skimmers and roach, and also of course you can catch bigger carp on it and tench. But the idea with the ground bait feeder is that you're constantly feeding one area in your swim. You're introducing free offerings like casters, worms, pellets through ground bait that's held in this cage feeder. Now cage feeders are very, very good when you're fishing on a commercial like this, because they disperse the bait very efficiently and easily into the swim. You've got to dictate actually where you fish in your swim depending on a few different factors, such as the time of the year. Is it warm like it is now in the summer, or is it cold in the winter? Are the fish going to be in the shallower water? Are they going to be against the cover, or are they going to be in the open water where the water's deeper? Today it's quite a warm summer's day, and the fish have been tight against the cover against the island. So the methods that have been best today have been methods that we've fished tight against that cover, where the carp want to be in these conditions. Well, the method feeder is a rig that's been developed and refined over recent years, and it's become so effective for catching carp and tench and bream in venues such as this commercial. Now the main thing to consider about it is the fact that the bait and ground bait that you're feeding is incorporated together in one small ball on the method feeder. The big advantage of that is that you're using a short hook length with a hair rig. That means that it's a self-hooking rig. So basically the fish is coming in on that parcel of food and taking your hook bait and hooking itself. So it's a very, very efficient method and style of fishing. A few things to think about when you're looking at methods. As with everything else in fishing, there's a multitude of different feeders to choose from. You can basically break it down into 2 versions. The fixed and the elasticated type, like this one. The elastic's there to help absorb the lunges of fish while you're playing them. Obviously the bite can be pretty vicious as the carp hooks itself, and that cushion from the elastic proves to be very, very beneficial. And then you've got the inline feeder, method feeder, like this one. So you haven't got the elastic in the middle, but you've got your main line going through the feeder, and then you've got your hook length coming out the bottom. So you've still got the same bolt effect, but you haven't got the cushion effect of the elastic. The reason that you'd use this over an elastic is, on some venues, the fixed and elasticated method is actually banned. Another thing to quickly mention is the use of these method molds that have evolved. And they mean that it's much easier for beginners, especially beginners, to be able to make the method ground bait package as efficient as possible. So it's much easier to do. So that's just a few things to think about when you're method feeder fishing. Well, because you're utilising the self-hooking properties of the rig, it's an advantage to have the hook length as short as possible. Some fisheries restrict that length, so you have to fish over 10 inches or 6 inches or whatever those rules stipulate. But generally the idea is that you incorporate your hook bait into the feed on the method. It just makes it such an efficient way of fishing. Another advantage is that when you're casting close to far bank features such as these reeds, you can actually almost cast the feeder into the reeds or just catch the reeds and you won't get hooked up. So that's a good advantage. Sometimes it is an advantage to actually leave the hook bait away from the feeder. Maybe if the fish are feeding really well and you're catching a lot of fish, or if you just want that little bit of a drop, a natural fall of the hook bait whilst the feeder's settling. It's something that can work on certain days, but for the bulk of the time you're going to be fishing with the hook bait incorporated into the ground bait. Well, the pellet feeder is a style of feeder fishing that's evolved relatively recently, and not surprisingly it encompasses using pellets as the main feed. Now, pellets such as these micro pellets are so effective and popular now on commercials, and particularly when you're fishing for bigger fish, a pellet feeder can really be a fantastic advantage. Follows many of the principles as the method feeder, in that the feeder and the hook bait is incorporated together with the feed. So just very quickly there, I've shown you that this pellet feeder has got the hook bait hidden inside with the rest of the feeders. And the idea is that that feeder hits the bottom, the pellets start to fall away, crumble away from the feeder, and your hook bait is presented very naturally amongst the free offerings. So it's a very effective method, and one that's gaining in popularity all the time. Well, there's a variety of different hook baits that you can use in conjunction with the pellet feeder and the method feeder. I've narrowed it down to 4 or 5 favourites. The first one to talk about is mini boilies. In this case, these are 8mm boilies. I've got some fish meal based standard boilies here, and some sweeter white chocolate flavoured boilies, just to give me a difference in bait. I've also got some soft pellets. The soft pellets are obviously more natural for the fish to feed on, and if you're catching well on pellets, it makes good sense to use a soft pellet on the hook as well. Finally, I've punched some meat using a meat punch. That's a very effective bait when you're fishing with the method or the pellet. You don't always use the same hook bait that you're feeding. It's just a matter of understanding what the best bait is on the day, and also with regard to the fish that you're targeting. If you're targeting bigger fish like bigger carp, you're perhaps better off sitting and waiting with a small mini boilie. The fact that it's hard, it's going to stay there, it's not going to be attacked and broken down by smaller fish. Whereas the pellet and the meat, you're not going to be able to leave for as long in the water, because smaller fish will gradually break it down and you're going to end up with a bare hook. Well, as I mentioned, I'm using the open end feeder to basically try and catch whatever I can from the swim, just determine what's feeding and basically kickstart the peg. I've got good old-fashioned maggots that I can use live like this, or I sometimes even use a dead maggot. I've got worms, and I've got casters. And what I like to do is mix a concoction of chopped worm and casters and feed that through the feeder by plugging it with ground bait. So that's basically a bait that's going to be very versatile and enable me to catch a variety of different fish. Well, nearly all the baits that we use on these rigs are used in conjunction with a hair. And for ease of use, I use this system, which is a quick stop on the hair, and you have the quick stop needle, and basically you simply push the quick stop through the bait, flick it back, and you've got the bait hooked perfectly onto the hair. So there's two types of feed that you can use when you're fishing with the method. You can use standard method ground bait, such as this, that will form the feed around the feeder, or around the method feeder. And in this case I've used this method mix. It's important to be very careful how you mix it, so that you've got a nice even consistency and a nice fluffy ground bait that will bind, so it will bind around the feeder, but also break down very quickly. You can also use dampened pellets and mould those onto the method feeder. In this case I'm using 2mm Gulp microcarp pellets that have to be dampened down. And that's also the main feed that I use when I'm fishing with a pellet feeder. So that's dampened microcarp pellets. One final tip to think about when you're feeder fishing on a commercial like this is the angle of your rod rest. So as you can see, especially when I'm casting this pellet feeder tight to the far bank, I want to be able to put the rod straight down onto the rest. The last thing I want to do is move my rod to a rod rest situated over here, because I'm going to pull the feeder away from the critical catching area tight to the far bank. So that's an important point to think about. You'll also notice that I'm clipped up, so I've got the line at a fixed distance to keep consistently landing it in the same spot. And the nice advantage of having the rod rest like this is that as the line sinks, I can gradually tension up to the feeder, being careful not to move it away, and it means that I've actually got a couple of turns of line on the reel before I hit the clip. So if I do hook a big fish, I've got time to try and get it away from the far bank and even undo the line from the clip if I need to. So there you go, that's a great mixed bag of fish taken on the 3 different styles of feeder that I've shown you. So the pellet feeder, the standard ground bait feeder, and also the method feeder. So I've caught some nice carp, I've caught some F1 carp, some tench, some skimmers. What a fantastic net of fish, and what a great method on commercials such as this.